Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out another chapter of Poisoner in Chief. It's called Abolishing Consciousness. Making the wrong friend in New York during the early 1950s led some people into psychic shock. They were brought to an apartment at 81 Bedford Street in Greenwich Village and given drinks laced with LSD. As they careened through their hallucinogenic trips, CIA operatives monitored their reactions. These unfortunates were unwilling subjects in one of the first MK Ultra experiments. The man Stanley Gottlieb hired to direct this operation, George Hunter White, stands out even in the dazzling MK Ultra cast of obsessed chemists, cold-hearted spy masters, grim torturers, hypnotists, electric shockers, and Nazi doctors. He was a hard-charging narcotics detective who lived large in the twilight world of crime and drugs. When Gottlieb offered him a job running a CIA safe house where he could dose unsuspecting visitors with LSD and record the results, he jumped at the chance. He imagined that he would be another wild episode in his long series of uncovered exploits. It was that and more. While stood 5 feet inches tall, weighed over 200 pounds, and shaved his head, writers described him as fat and bull-like, a vastly obese slob of a man. He looked like an extremely menacing bowling ball. His first wife, who divorced him in 1945, called him a fat slob. He regularly used illegal drugs, keeping for himself a share of whatever he confiscated. He consumed of alcohol, often a full bottle of gin with dinner was legendary. His other appetite was sexual fetish, especially sadomasochism and high heels. He brought his second wife a closet full of boots and patronized prostitutes who bound and whipped him. One of the few emotional bonds was his pet canary. He loved to hold and stroke it. When the bird died, he was deeply pained. Poor little bastard just couldn't make it, he wrote in his diary. I don't know if I'll ever get another bird or pet. It's tough on everyone when they die. After several years as a crime reporter for the San Francisco Call Bulletin, White joined the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Quickly, he became one of the crack agents. He made national headlines in 1937 by busting a Chinese-American opium ring, supposedly after being initiated into the gang and agreeing to death by fire. In a stirring article headlined "Within the Rookie Took the Tong." He cultivated his image and lost to chance to enhance it. Sometimes he invited reporters to accompany him on raids. Without quitting the Narcotics Bureau, while joining the Office of Strategic Services when World War II broke out, he was sent for paramilitary training at a secret base in Ontario called Camp X, which he later called a school of murder and mayhem. After completing the course, he became a trainer himself. Several of the trainees went on to long careers at the CIA, including Richard Helms, Frank Wiesner, James Jesus Angleton. Later, he was posed in India, where he supposedly killed a Japanese spy with his own hands. He helped direct OSS Truth Serum experience, in which prisoners were fed various drugs to test their values as aids to interrogation. During the post-war years, White found a new kind of notoriety by leading the Narcotics Bureau campaign against jazz in New York City. He spied on musicians he suspected of using drugs and trapped them, arrested them, and arranged for them to lose their cabaret cards, which they needed to perform in New York. In 1949, he made national headlines by arresting Billie Holiday. Welcome to the vinyl community. For possession of opium. She insisted that she had been clean for a year and accused White of planting evidence. A jury acquitted her, but the ordeal and White's relentless pursuit helped her fuel her decline towards her early death. In 1950, while White went to work for Senator Joseph McCarthy committee investigating supposed communist influence in the State Department, from there he moved to another committee chaired by Senator Estes Kefauver, who was investigating organized crime. He proved reckless, leaking allegations that both President Truman and Governor Thomas Dewey of New York were tied to the mafia. Kefauver fired him after less than a year. He was ready for a new adventure when Gottlieb called. These two Americans, both masters of covert power, had hardly been more different. White was an adrenaline-driven libertine with a sadistic streak who was rarely sober and reveled in life at the violent fringes of society. Gottlieb, well, was a scientist who ate yogurt. At this moment, though, they fit together well. Gottlieb was looking for someone with smart streets who knew how to bend the break the law while seeming to enforce it. White knew that and more. White's circles of dubious acquaintances gave him a rich pool of potential subjects for drug experiments. He was accustomed to treating people roughly. He could be relied upon to keep secrets. Since he was still in the payroll of the Narcotics Bureau, the CIA would deny any connection to him. If something went wrong, the qualities made him an ideal partner. Gottlieb had already tested LSD on volunteers and unsuspecting victims. He was about to begin distributing it into hospitals and medical schools for controlled experiments. In order to learn more about how ordinary people would react to it, he decided to open a safe house inside the United States. The subject would be a new kind of expendable. Many of those White brought to his safe house at 81 Bedford Street were drug users, petty criminals, and others who could be relied upon not to complain about what had happened to them. The few people who knew about MKUltra considered it crucial to America's survival. Limiting its scope out of concern for a few lives, or even for a few hundred or more, we have seemed to them not simply absurd but treasonous. The safe house in New York epitomized this moral bargain. Allen Dulles had given Gottlieb an almost laughable, daunting assignment: discover a wonder drug to defeat freedom's enemies and save the world. It was a supreme challenge to a scientific imagination. Gottlieb was ready for it as any American. In May of '52, soon after hearing of White from a colleague at the Technical Services staff, Gottlieb invited him to Washington for a chat. They talked about the OSS. Both had truth serum experiments and had fabled Division 19, the gadget shop where artisans crafted silent pistols, poison dart guns, and other tools of the trade. When the conversation turned to LSD, Gottlieb was surprised to hear how much White knew about it, reflecting the extent of the Narcotics Bureau's secret experimentation. White offered to show Gottlieb how it worked. The two of them drove to New Haven, Connecticut, where White was building a case against the businessman who was suspected of a heroin wholesaler. The trip, Gottlieb later recalled, really gave us a chance to discuss matters of interest. It exposed him to a new world and left him smitten. White, he said, was always armed to his teeth with all sorts of weapons. He could be gruff and loutish, vulgar even, and then turned urban to the point of eloquence. The CIA did not normally employ people like him. We were Ivy League, white middle class, one of Gottlieb's colleagues later explained. We were naive, totally naive about this, and he felt pretty expert. He knew the whores, the pimps, the people who brought in the drugs. He was a pretty wild man. When married his vivacious second wife, Albertine, in 1951, she shared many of his interests and joined him in group sex, fetish scenes involving leather boots, and the drugging of their friends and other unwitting subjects. By one account, she turned a blind eye to her husband's deviant behavior and thoroughly enjoyed the fast company her husband kept. Decades later, a researcher confronted her with the report of a woman who had a mental breakdown after Whites apparently fed her LSD at their Greenwich Village apartment. A report that Albertine descended into a string of expletives that would have embarrassed a sailor. Her tirade left this writer with the firm impression that she was thoroughly capable of having been White's accomplice of his dirty work. In 1952, the White House hosted a Thanksgiving dinner party for the CIA counterintelligence chief, James Jesus Angleton, who a decade earlier had been George's student at the OSS, Schools of Mayhem and Murder, in Ontario. The next evening, the two men met again, this time to drink gin and tonic laced with LSD. They took a taxi to a Chinese restaurant. After they were served, according to White's diary, they began laughing about something I can't remember now, but I never got around to eating a bite. Gottlieb spent 3 months shuttling back and forth between the United States and the safe houses abroad. Many of his experiments served his focused interest in LSD. This was also the time when Stanley Glickman was drugged in Paris. Even these far-flung experiments, however, did not bring the results Gottlieb wanted. George Hunter White opened a new world. Soon after they met, Gottlieb asked if White would like to work with him. White was interested. Indiscreetly, he recorded the offer in his diary. Gottlieb proposed to be a CIA consultant. White wrote, "I agree." Before Gottlieb could steal their partnership, he faced an unexpected problem. CIA officers in Washington delayed White's application for security clearance. Part of the problem, as White suspected, was cultural. A couple of crew cutout, pipe smoking punts had either known me or heard of me during the OSS days and had decided I was too rough for their league and promptly blackballed me. He later wrote, the delay also reflected Gottlieb's bureaucratic challenge. He was assuming control of what was arguably the American government's most important covert program. It was natural that others in the CIA would resist. The Office of Scientific Intelligence sought to establish control over some aspects of MKUltra. So did the Office of Security. Morris Allen, who had helped run both the Bluebird and Artichoke projects, was in no mood to withdraw. Allen Dulles faithfully supported Gottlieb in these turf battles, but he could not ignore grumbling from senior officers who had reason to resent his newcomer's growing power. They showed their unhappiness by taking a year to approve White's security clearance. When approved finally came, Gottlieb traveled to New York to deliver the good news in person. He brought a check to cover startup costs. White used the first $3,400 as a deposit for his lair at 81 Bedford Street. CIA got final clearance and signed contract as consultant, met Gottlieb. White wrote in his diary on June 8, 1953, the Bedford Street complex was about to become something unique, a CIA safe house in the heart of New York, to which unsuspecting citizens would be lured and surreptitiously drugged with the goal of finding ways to fight communism. It was comprised of two adjoining apartments. Surveillance equipped allowed observers in one to record what was happening in the other. Gottlieb already had safe houses abroad where he could drug people as he wished. Now he had one in New York. That fall, White began prowling Greenwich Village for people he could befriend and then secretly dose with LSD and other drugs. He invented an alias, Morgan Hall, and a couple of fake life stories. He posed alternately as a merchant seaman or a bohemian artist and consorted with a vast array of underworld characters, all of whom were involved in vice, including drugs, prostitution, gambling, and pornography. According to one survey of White's career, I was under the assumed bohemian artist persona that White would entrap most of his MKUltra victims. Some of the people White dosed with LSD were his friends, including one who ran Vixen Press, who specialized in fetish and lesbian pulp. Other victims included young women who had the misfortune to cross his path. His diary suggests how they reacted. Gloria gets horror. Janet gets high. White was sufficiently impressed with the power of LSD to begin calling it Stormy in his diary entries. Nonetheless, he continued giving it to anyone he could lure into his den. I was angry at George for that, said Vixen Press publisher, said years later. It turned out to be a bad thing to do to people, and we didn't realize it at the time. White's connections protected him from exposure. The victims of one of his experiments staggered into Lenox Hill Hospital afterwards, claiming she had been drugged. After a couple of hours, she told that she was probably mistaken and quietly discharged. Episodes like these were kept quiet because the CIA had, as one account put it, arranged an accommodation with the medical department of the New York City Police Department to protect White from any hassles. The opening of the safe house on Bedford Street contributed to festering tension between the CIA and FBI. Some CIA officers thought of the FBI as a haven for dumb cops and a ham-fisted thugs. FBI agents returned the favor, considering CIA men amateurish prima donnas, and one put it, mostly rich boys, trust fund snobs who thought they were God's answer to all of the world's ills. Allen Dulles and his FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, were fierce bureaucratic rivals. It would have been unlike Hoover to explain about the safe house, but also unlike him to have learned about it. The news came in a report from the New York office just 3 weeks after White paid the deposit. The confidential informant of this office advised on July 1st that his former supervisor of the Bureau of Narcotics, George White, had become associated with the CIA in an ultra-secret assignment as a consultant. The report said White and the CIA had rented dual apartments at 81 Bedford Street in New York City. One of these apartments had been set up a bar and quarters for entertainment, while the other apartment is being used by the CIA for the purpose of taking motion pictures through an X-ray mirror of the activities of the former apartment. Gottlieb closely supervised this operation. He and White met regularly in Washington and New York. Their personal bond grew. White had taken up a leather working as a hobby, and when Gottlieb celebrated his 36th birthday on August 3rd, 1954, White gave him a handcrafted belt as a gift. Folk dancing had become one of Gottlieb's passion, and he sometimes invited colleagues to try a few steps with him. Not all were willing. White was. Gottlieb taught him to dance a jig, and they delighted friends by showing it off. These partners, one club-footed and the other obese, danced together as they were launching their covert LSD experiments. White's expense reports for the safe house at 81 Bedford Street, meticulously submitted to the technical services staff, bear a clearly legible counter signature, Sidney Gottlieb, Chief Chemical Division, TSS. We'll save this chapter for tomorrow. It goes into the Rosenbergs and Eisenhower and more experiments and on and on. So we're going to say goodbye now to the crime community and even the vinyl community. And we like and pray for your enjoying my stream. And I hope to gain your confidence and clicks.